I recently completed this sideboard for our dining room. It features 3 compartments, 2 sliding doors, and the doors are made with some live edge walnut and patinaed copper. And then in the middle we have 4 drawers that have a beautiful texture and some figured walnut wood. There's just a lot of details in this one, and it was a lot of fun to make. Now, I originally started this project as a course for the Wood Whisperer Guild. Now, if you're not familiar, that's where we do all of our advanced courses, multi-part series, and we really get into the details of this stuff. There were a few things about the design that I wasn't 100% happy with, and I decided to not put this in the guild and instead release it here for everyone to enjoy for free. Now, the other thing is this is going to involve a lot of detail, a lot of talking, and some people like that, some don't. Now, if it's not your cup of tea, don't worry about it. We're going to have a condensed version if you just want to see this project come together. But if you do like these details, stay tuned. We've got a multi-part series here that gives you a taste of what it's like inside the Wood Whisperer Guild. All right, so let's head back to the shop and start building this thing. Legs and rails. It's all about that grain. All right, so the first thing we're going to start with is the sides of the case. With a project like this, you have a couple different ways you can start, and I guess it might just depend on what you like, your personal preferences. For me, I tend to want to go from the outside in, and I want to think about the things that kind of are their own little universe, where, for instance, the side assembly with the legs, the rails, and that side panel, that can all be done ahead of time, and then we can move to the internals of the casework. So to me, it's just a logical starting point that makes a good little section, almost a mini project in and of itself. So this whole process with the side sub-assembly starts with the legs. So let's head to the wood area. Is that what we're calling that now? The other room where I keep the wood, and see if we can find some good material for our legs. All right, welcome to MARC's Walnut Emporium, and I've got some very long boards here. I'm not that short. These are just really tall. Don't get any ideas. But these boards are pretty, I don't know, they're all pretty darn good. The grain is nice and clean. Fairly straight grain as we go. But the thing I'm looking for in my legs, you would think that this is telling me everything I need to know. It's actually the end grain that I'm most interested in. So I'm just gonna grab one. There's plenty of material in any of these boards for all 4 of our legs. I don't think we need to get nuts with it.
Now you wanna get nuts? Come on, let's get nuts.
Hopefully I can get the smallest board here, because I do sell lumber, and the smallest one, if it's got a little sap, that's probably the least likely to sell. So we'll start looking at this one and see what we got going on in the end grain. Now, what we're looking for in the end grain is essentially rift sawn material. So you have a couple different ways that wood can be cut from the tree. We have flat sawn, where the grain just kind of runs across the width like this. Then you have quarter sawn. This is actually on the smaller board that I picked out. A great example of quarter sawn. You see the grain is just vertical, like so. And then you have something that's called rift sawn, which is kind of between the two. It's on a little bit of an angle, and we have an example of that here with the way these little stripes go this way. And what'll happen is over the course of a wide enough board, if you get closer to the center of the tree, between the center and the outside, you can see the whole range. So we have flat sawn material here, transitioning to rift, and eventually it'll be quarter sawn. So what we're trying to do is isolate the rift sawn material, and what this does is it gives us a consistent look on all 4 outside faces of the leg. If I go with quarter sawn, what that's going to do is give me nice straight grain lines on these 2 faces, but the other 2 faces will have that flat sawn sort of dispersed cathedral pattern look. Rift sawn, on the other hand, gives you kind of the same sort of straightened pattern on all 4 sides, and it also makes it really nice if you're doing like a cabriole leg or you're doing some shaping afterwards. The orientation of that grain really makes a big difference in how the grain acts when you make those cuts into the leg. So whenever we do legs, whenever possible, if you're trying to be efficient about material, this may not be the greatest choice, but if you don't mind sacrificing efficiency for the sake of the final look, you're always going to want to hunt down this quarter sawn material. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to try to avoid some of this really straight stuff, right? I don't want that. As it starts to kick out this way, that's the good stuff. So I'm going to maybe start one of my legs here, and there. That might be one leg, and then a second row of legs right about here. And with the length of this board, I should be able to get 2 side by side, and then another 2 side by side further down the board, assuming the grain doesn't shift as it goes along the length. So let's start cutting this down. So all I'm gonna do is use my steel ruler here to lay out some lines here that we can use to cut this guy down, just to get an idea. This ruler is 2 inches wide. My legs are 1 3/4 inches, so I know I've got some overage in here, and that's perfectly fine. So 35-inch long legs, we'll go a little bit over that when I do a rough cut. We'll call it 35.5, right about here, and that would be across these 2. And then we gotta go another 35 for for the second set. Now it might seem wasteful, kind of touched on that before, because I'm going right in the middle of the board and I'm not using these outside strips, at least not for this project. They'll go on the side for something else in the future, but I think it's worth it when you get the grain to look just right. And this is all part of that fine woodworking process. And we'll go a little over 35 here. And that's our second set. We can cut these down. This board is still rough and unstable, so I make 2 passes when cutting at the miter saw to help avoid a kickback. If you've never had a kickback at the miter saw, good. I don't recommend it. I could then joint one edge so that we have a nice straight reference point, and then head to the bandsaw to cut out the individual legs. Again, the board is rough, so the bandsaw is a much safer option here, as it's less prone to kickback compared to the table saw. Back at the joiner, I'll square up and flatten 2 faces, and then use the planer to bring the legs to final dimension. And back at the miter saw, I'll clean up one end and then use a stop to cut to final length. So now I've got a total of 6 legs. We only need 4. I do recommend you make at least 1 extra because number 1, it's good to have a spare just in case something gets screwed up. And number 2, if you're going to be working out joinery or any other details, you have a spare that you could play with first and then apply that to your other 4 legs. So I actually have 2 extra because I've got a couple things I still need to work out. But let's just look at the end grain and we can see exactly why these are my extras and not my main legs. We sort of have a quarter sawn grain that takes a little bit of a turn, not ideal. And then on this one, I mean, it's almost completely quarter sawn. So both of these, not ideal candidates. So those are my extras. And if you take a look at the 4 that I'm going to use, I drew with pencil just so you could see a little bit better what's going on with the grain patterns. Now, the goal here is to not just get these sort of riff sawn boards here. You want to orient them in a certain way in the final piece. And I like to think of the perspective being I'm standing in front of this piece of furniture. So I have my front left, front right, rear left, rear right. And when I bring those 4 legs together, this is what they're going to look like. But let's take a look at what's going on with the end grain. Now, you can actually orient it whatever way you want, but for best results, you want to point your grain toward the middle in some sort of sensible way. And this actually does ensure that the legs will, especially when you cut into them, the cuts and the grain will look like they go with the direction of the cut. If you don't do this, they can kind of look a little bit haphazard and you might get results that don't look so good. So I always like to aim these for the center. So if this is the middle of the unit, like think of this as my front left, front right, rear left, rear right, how are we going to orient these so they all point toward the center? So my 2 bottom ones actually kind of look okay. This one slopes up this way, this guy slopes up that way, pointing at the center. So if I rotate these around, I might be able to find something. Okay, so that does point in the middle. That could work, but yeah, let me see. Let me see if I can get this one looking pretty good. I kind of like them to look like mirror images of each other too. I'm not sure we have that just yet. Go around this way. Okay, that's looking a lot better. So you see these 2 kind of look like mirror images. These 2 look like mirror images. These 2 also look like mirror images, as do these. So now all 4 of these are pointing toward the center. I feel pretty good about that. So I'm going to make a little circular mark here. That's how I know that's my center. And then I'm going to write the actual letters on here to designate these as their particular legs. So now we not only know the position of the leg within the workpiece or the project itself, but we know the orientation of that leg. And that's important because we have joinery to add. We want to make sure we cut the mortises on the correct faces. So this is something we will always be able to reference to know which face we're working on. So now we're going to put the legs aside and start working on the side rails. And we have to be strategic about this too, and you have some opportunities here. If we can use the same board that we used for the legs, we can be sure that the grain and color will match up nicely. So I decided to take the rest of the original leg board and cut it down for the rails. Once cut to width, I can resaw down the center to create the individual rails. This is definitely a little bit more wasteful than just using 4/4 material, but sometimes we have to make the less efficient choice for the sake of aesthetics. All right, so it's the next morning and now I'm gonna tackle these guys. I do have just the tiniest bit of movement here. Truth is, I don't know if that movement happened at the time of the cut or it happened overnight, but either way, it's a small enough amount that it's not gonna hurt anything. We're gonna cut it in half and do some milling to get these things nice and straight. So before we go any further with the domino, we have to get a couple of things straight. And the good thing, this is kind of methodology that would work whether you're doing the domino or you're doing mortises, and that's keeping track of our reference surfaces. Where are we referencing from to get the most consistency possible? And there actually are wrong and right answers depending on what you do. Everything I'm gonna do is measuring from the top, right? So even though I have two rails, so I have one upper rail, one lower rail. When I have the measurement points for my dominoes, I'm gonna reference from the top down. The reason I do that is because I wanna make sure we are absolutely consistent. If you measure from the top down for our top rail, but then we measure from the bottom up from our bottom rail, what happens if one of these legs is slightly different in length? And I'm talking like by a 1/16 of an inch. Let's say it's a little bit off. Well, then our reference points in the space between our rails, that will change if we use two different reference points. But even if one of my legs is longer, if I'm always measuring from the top down, then I know the spacing on those two rails is going to be exactly the same on all these legs. I'll just have one leg or two legs that might be slightly different in total length. We could address that later if we need to at all. I just want to make sure that my rails are positioned in the same positions on both sides, right? So top down is one reference point. We're also going to be measuring from the inside face. And on this particular design, we're going flush with these rails. So if we need a flush surface on the inside, especially when you're using the domino, you want to make sure you're measuring from that face. So my domino will go in this way, referencing with the fence on this face, and we'll reference from that same face on the rails. Now this will make more sense as we get into it, but I just want to make sure we understand this concept of our reference points. So now we're just going to kind of label everything, make sure we know each one of these pieces so we don't get mixed up, because that's the biggest mistake. The domino is easy, but it's also easy to get mixed up, confused, put the wrong size mortise in a location or put it in the wrong spot. So let's not do that. So I'm gonna focus on one side at a time, understand that everything we're doing is gonna happen on the other side too. So I'll take one pair of legs here, just my right side. This is my left side, put it over here. And remember, the top tells us everything we need to know. That inner little circle says that's the inside corner, so we're gonna keep that in mind. So if this is my front right leg, this is my rear right, I'm just going to take two of my rails and we're going to label them. So I got my top and my bottom. So we're going to say right upper, right lower. And I'm going to call that my outside face, right? So I could view these from the outside. So in this position, these guys would be like this. Well, that would be the lower, this is the upper. So in order to not get confused, I'm going to take my two legs just as they are, flip them like this to expose that inside face. I got my right upper rail, which is going to go like so. My right lower rail will be flush somewhere down here. We don't know exactly where. And now we're going to start to draw our pencil lines. Each rail will receive two dominoes, so I measure down from the top and draw my center lines. To make the marks easier to see, I use a square to extend them across the surface. To mark the other leg, I'll just flush up the two legs at the top, clamp them together, and then extend the lines. And now we can take those legs and use those the same way to transfer the marks to the legs for the other side of the case. Now to get our marks on the rails, you have a couple of options. The top one would be very easy to just make it flush with the top, and then we could transfer those marks over. It's not really going to do us any favors down here on the bottom connection because, well, that's much longer and I don't have an easy way to reference where this actually goes. So what I'm going to do is get a couple of squares set up. I've got one set up for that 3/4, one set up for the 1 3/4. And this way I could transfer those marks directly to each of these rails. All right, so this is my upper rail, this is the lower rail, and we are going to be using two different size domino tenons, just to confuse things. So this is going to be a 5x30, this is a 10x50, and this is the orientation I'm going for. We're doing this because I have certain things that we need to dodge in the joinery and the legs that you'll see later, so we're going with a smaller one as to not interfere with the thing that we're doing in the leg. So all you need to know is mark the locations of the larger one and the smaller one. So for me, I'm just going to put a 10 by the 10s, and a 5 by the 5s. So I'm going to keep that orientation in mind when I mark all of my lines. I cannot afford to make a mistake here. You just want to make sure you have those 10s and 5s everywhere you have one of these little white lines so you don't make any mistakes. And now if you want, take your rails, now that they're marked up, and just make sure you got everything straight. Transfer those same numbers to the leg. That will really help you not make a mistake here. 10, Now the magic of the domino is when you get everything dialed in, there's a simplicity to everything and a repeatability to everything. So the strategy I'm going to employ here is I'm going to set this fence here, which determines where the bit's going to come out. I'm going to set it for a 3/4 inch workpiece so that it's dead center of that 3/4 inch workpiece. And if you look at our rails, we know those are 3/4. So if I want to be centered on the thickness here, once I get that and it's dead on, and I put that same mortise into the leg, that's going to ensure that that mortise is placed the same distance from this inside surface on both of these pieces, and the end result will be as close to dead flush as we can possibly get. I actually do have the 5mm bit in. We're going to start with our smaller mortises first. That might be the best thing about the domino. So now we can just do a little bit of a dry assembly. I don't want to glue anything in just yet, so I'm going to start to add my dominoes. And depending on where you live and the humidity, sometimes you might want to sand these down, especially for the test glue up or the test assembly. Ooh, that one's a little snug. That one's tight. Because sometimes they're a little tough to get back out. So I got a right upper, and what we're hoping for here is a nice flush fit where we're flush with the top, flush on the inside face, and I think we've got exactly that. Here's my right lower. There we go. Oh man, look at that. It's what makes the domino great. I don't want to sing its praises too much because I understand it's a little bit divisive, but in some cases it just works really well. That's looking pretty good. Definitely not gluing it together yet because we still have more things we need to do, but that's confirmation that everything's lined up where it's supposed to be. I feel pretty good about it. So we'll put this to the side, assemble our other one as well. One thing I like to do just to make assembly easier later on, we don't want to do the final glue up on our sides, but what we can do is actually glue these tenons into the mortises, and they almost become like classic integral mortises, just part of this rail. And there's no reason that we can't do that right now. So I'm going to pop a little glue in each of the mortises, spread it around. Okay, a little bit of glue on the tenons. Just make sure they bottom out. Oh, that one's a little loose, so I don't have much to worry about there. Okay, now you can wipe up the squeeze out right now, or you could let this set up just a little bit and then come back with a chisel and just kind of peel that stuff right off of there. But this will save us a lot of time later, and it's just less gluing to worry about in the final glue up. Next time on The Wood Whisperer. Now they should be the same, but ultimately real life changes things. My buddy Tim was able to resaw a couple of crotchy walnut boards here that have just an amazing grain pattern.